Okay, so in this video, I'm gonna go over basically everything on rebuilding the hx35. Just gonna start. This thing's already torn down and been balanced. I'll toss that in there. But you have a bare cartridge with just the lower snap rings in it. So what I like to do, one, check snap ring tension. And secondly, I like to turn the lower snap rings to the middle, well, to the bottom on the inside. Do that there. So this side's the oil drain and the snap ring openings facing it. This helps basically get the oil to drain towards the center of the cartridge and not towards the front. Given most of your modern turbochargers have provisions, well, they do have provisions to deal with keeping the oil from exiting the turbocharger, but I feel like little things like this are what helps make it go the distance. So next, we need to get some journal bearings. So given, mainly clone parts, the big thing with clones is you should take them apart and go through them. Things that are highly mass produced, they tend to have problems. So you want to catch it. This is what I assemble with. So driven racing oils, engine assembly grease. Works great, especially when the turbos are going to sit for a while. Which happens, someone can purchase one and ends up sitting on a shelf for a few months. If you use a regular oil, it tends to leak out of them because most people store these things either on their front side or their back side. And the way these things keep oil from coming out of them is they have to be spinning. So if it's just sitting there not spinning at all, what you'll find is that it'll leak a bunch of oil out into the heat shield. So on startup, you get a bunch of smoke. Or it'll leak it behind the compressor cover, and then on startup, you'll get what looks like a bad front seal, and it's actually just the way the turbo is stored. Tools that I use, 90-degree pick, straight pick. That's for setting up the snap rings mainly, small ones. Small set of snap ring pliers. A trick that I use is I got the ones that have different ends in them. So for certain, there are different turbochargers, especially older ones. The snap rings can be quite a far ways down in there. So you can change these ends out and make your own, the longer and shorter ones. I don't know if I'll show up on camera, but per spec, snap rings have a side. Because of how they're punched out. So the sharp edge will be the top edge of the punch. This faces away from the journal, and the rounded edge faces the journal bearing. And I like to put these with the open end facing the oil feed side. Big thing when you drop these things in here is always go back with your 90. You hear that, and pull up on the snap ring. Most of the time they're not in the groove, so I use the 90 to pull them up into the groove. Usually one side's not. So that's this side done. I use these little aluminum blocks to set the parts on. Allows me to channel light down through the bottom. By doing so, it's easy for me to see, mainly when I'm putting in the lower snap rings. I can see where the where it is, if I've gone too far or not. Not too many things like more frustrating, than dropping the snap ring inside the turbo. Over and over, say, it happens. back to back. If you have a bearing that fits weird or fits loose or fits too tight, recommend have a caliper and go ahead and check it. Sometimes the bearings aren't always, size they're supposed to be. So if it doesn't feel right, probably they don't eat right. There's this one. Let's check all three corners. One's at the very bottom and one on that side of each tab. So next, we got to take our rotor assembly, which has already been done on the balancer. Mark's already laid out. Get this part and get those collars and thrust bearings put in there. So these parts are already marked out, but you can't mark everything. But come back in here. Just finish the other sides with a Sharpie. The Sharpie mark's going to come off as soon as this thing starts up. The balancer will catch when these things aren't machined right. You just put a little grease on the backside. Helps hold it in place. I don't put anything on the face because the thrust bearing is going to get all that. Pretty good. And here's your thrust. Brand new. There's no problems. You do want to watch some of these can get damaged when they, if they do, the place you get the clone from, if they do VSR balance this, sometimes these get damaged. So it takes all 2 minutes, take it apart, check it. Why use clone parts? Well, the OEM parts are, one, they don't make them. Two, these turbos that are in good shape, that are this old, they're getting few and far between. So finding a way to do something that's a replica that is of equal quality is quite helpful for allowing that person that owns the truck, should something happen to the one that they have and the parts become, the way that it's damaged is irreplaceable or it's rusted out, and they're not made of, a lot of us aren't made of money. We can get them back into a fully functioning turbocharger that's, the same quality as the OEM by going through it, switching out the stuff that it came with. But the stuff that I typically use, we're going to be in fairly good shape. Let me go get a feeler gauge. So the one thing you want that can't hurt, take your front retainer, pop in front piston ring seal, square it up. That's supposed to sit, and then what you can do is you can just check it. So what this guy does is it keeps boost pressure leaking in here. So general rule of thumb, you'll see some light through it. If you're worried about it, you can always check it, because this thing's going to expand as it warms up. But now, given that it's going to expand, they don't expand nearly as much as the rear one does. So the rear one's the important one to not screw up. You have a 0.025 gap. That is within spec. Same thing happens to these rings. They get too hot. Except for on the piston, scars your walls and typically breaks the ring. What it'll do on these guys is it'll grow to the point where it can't grow out, so it starts to oblong, and it'll grab the rotating part. When it grabs the rotating part and spins this in this bore, it welds it to this, and then not too shortly after, everything comes apart. Piston ring end gaps. They all face the top. No ifs, ands, or buts. So there we go. Go ahead and clean this up. Over time, I've accumulated quite the amount of different piston rings. They're not all created equal. They're not all the same size. So sometimes too, you'll get retainers that are a little smaller than they should be. Sometimes you'll get the rear piston ring seal that might be slightly worn or slightly tighter than it should be. And having all those available helps a lot. You can also file these rings down if you have no other options available to you. So I just take my finger, put it in this bottom port, and grab the splash guard. But I don't like how this feels. So right now the splash guard's too tight to the base wall. Yep. So this angle here, we're going to go ahead and pull that guy out quite a bit. Do it again. There we go. If that guard is too close to the wall, it will not drain fast enough. You see, it kind of cuts off the drain port. You do want to make sure it's square in there. Oh, remember this one. This one's too big. Remember it being a pain to get out. There you go. So that can just sit there for a moment while we clean our hands. What I found works really good. You cap off a brake clean bottle. It's right in this spot. Really nice. All you gotta do is come in here, push that down squarely, drop that ring in there, and then what you want to do with a hammer and a punch, you can hear the difference. So if you don't do that, what can happen is pressure from underneath the wheel can get underneath this ring and lift this ring out of the groove, and then the compressor wheel will yank it out. It'll grab it and it'll pull it out of this spot and just yank it right out and just destroy everything. Figure out how I figured that one out. It was only done that one I think once or twice. So this is ready to go in the vise. I'm going to torque it. Just involves letting the compressor wheels mark once it's at torque value with the turbine's mark. So the turbine wheel has an equal mark. Can't show the turbine wheel because it has work done to it that I can't put on video. So that's that. Factory torque spec is 124 inch-pounds, left-handed threads. That's also as far as I can go on that. It's not the torque spec that I use, but that is the factory. If you do the factory torque spec on a factory turbocharger, you will have zero issues. It's when using the turbocharger in different applications that it can cause problems. I'll be right back. So just like on the front side, go ahead and take your rear piston ring seal. Drop it in there. You have your feeler gauges. Now given on this side, you're going to want a little more space. You got 0.006, big number. So what'll happen is this guy expands quite a lot faster than your front side one does. So you need more space for more expansion. So when everything's cold and you do make, boost pressure when things are cold, you're going to have more exhaust gas leakage through this ring, which will bleed itself off down through the drain and into your crankcase ventilation. So that's what the checking with this guy. Realistically, you just don't want it. Probably wouldn't do anything less than 0.004, 0.003, 0.004. You want a little more than that. 0.008 is a nice setup. If you have more than 0.008, you can go to a split gap ring. This particular ring is too big. Here's a split gap ring. See it there? Versus a non-split gap. So split gap's purpose mainly is for worn parts, so you can save a worn housing that might have spun this rear seal a little bit, because that'll open up this tolerance. You can go to a split gap to protect that, but properly sized regular one versus split gap is the same performance. It's no different. We'll be using, I've been using this for I don't know how long, forever. Lucas Oil assembly oil on the shaft itself. It basically, because I'm trying to get oil all the way down the shaft all the way to the front bearing and everything else. Doing this, the thinner oil helps with that, but it's not so much that if this thing is stored on its end, it's going to leak. So in the wintertime, you can build the whole turbocharger using this. Usually they won't leak nothing if it's cold enough, but in the wintertime or summertime out here, it's so hot that you can watch it. If you prop those things up on their ends, they'll start to leak oil into the heat shields if they're sitting on their back, or behind the compressor if they're sitting on their nose. We're back. It's interesting here. Like I said, clone unit. Clone units are just fine. You just have to check them out, because mass production means more mistakes. Obviously, I was able to, well, I did turbine work, so I didn't actually check this one how it came. I have checked a few of these, how they come. They're usually fine, but not always. Because I did turbine work, this one had to get redone no matter what. Remember, spin them clockwise, or spin the direction of rotation they're supposed to go, so you don't beat up the journal bearing, because they're directional. Okay, the next thing I like to do is, I don't like the factory bolts. They're 12 millimeters long. I have higher grade quality stainless steel bolts that I order in. Some washers on the splits. These are 14 millimeters long, M8 by 1.25, 14 millimeters long. And we want to put the top of these, since the washer is going to increase the height, we got to put and the oil feed is underneath, so they have to go a certain way. Here's the anti-seize that I use. Good stuff. MMC78. The high temperature anti-seize. And don't be afraid to put too much, just don't turn yourself into a tin man. Just so they're loose, rotate out of the way. That might be a little much. I always like to pre-roll my bolts. They're just a tiny little washer. That keeps the bolt from cutting where the split's at. So this turbo is going on a first gen that's pretty close to stock. Supposedly 40 horsepower injectors, fuel pin, ghost spring. That's going to be it. So going from the 18 centimeter H1C over to this turbocharger is going to make quite the difference. Pair that with turbine stuff, we should get it to breathe upstairs pretty well. So all I need is a square. 45 degree to the manifold. And square your base up to your base. But I will say, tilt them counterclockwise, like 3 to 5 degrees. Seems to be how the factory oil drains like to sit. They are canted just a hair. I've never measured what they are to a T, but I've been doing that for a while, and that seems to be installing pretty perfectly. Here, just snug up one side, snug up the other side, check. So you may notice I have cut the barb off of here. That's because I'm going to use a push lock disconnect fitting with a 1/4 inch line with a needle valve at the turbocharger's pump cover. So what that's going to do is allow the owner to change the boost pressure really easily. So basically it's a boost elbow that isn't going to just fall apart on you. Because the boost elbow things, they don't have a way to lock that set screw down other than Loctite. Maybe you want to, you adjust it, or you make an injector change or a tune change. And now the boost needs to come down, or you go backwards and the boost has to come up. So stuff like that, turbo. That'll make it super easy. Here's our comp cover. Added this port, and this is where the needle valve is going to go. I thought that I do have some. The problem is I don't know where they're at, because the last time I used them was when I made my own AFC controller for the P-pumps. One thing that I do like to do as a recent, if I can find it, this triangle looking dude. I feel bad about all the arms. This upper ridge that's above where the snap ring sits, so up here, I'm going to peen this in. That's going to deform this lip, and what that does is it helps grab the snap ring, because these things are really bad about getting pressure underneath this face and behind the snap ring, and then from there it'll compress the snap ring and blow the cover off. That is one really nice thing with bolt-on covers, is you do not got to deal with that problem. Or other housings are O-ringed. The other thing that you can do, as I do for 351s, is Loctite 518 flange sealant. The only thing is you need to know exactly where the cover is going to go. So 351s are easy because the wastegate actuator locates the cover. These don't have that because the gates actuators and on the housing. This is easy to remove. It comes off with alcohol or brake cleaner. To get the cover off, a few good whacks with a dead blow hammer. It'll take it right off. So it comes apart easy enough, but it seals fantastic, so it keeps that from happening. I'm going to go ahead and peen this cover in, and we'll be right back. All right. How I set this part up. Drop this guy on. So normally your name tag sits pretty perpendicular to the turbine inlet. What I have here is a factory oil drain for 89 to 98. I like to stick this in place underneath. And get it pretty close. That looks good. That clearance checks out good. Toss a little cap on the top so our pump face doesn't get dirty. Oh, these 12s weigh a ton. Flip that over. Now face the snap ring diagonally towards me, like so. So what this does is when it's on the truck, it's easy for the owner to squeeze this and rotate the cover. Down here's not too bad. Top is a pain in the butt because of oil feed. Anything down here is a pain to get to because all the other stuff in the way. So about right there does pretty good. These are your big snap ring pliers, come in handy. Use a set of slip joints to press it down. That's in place. So here's the most important part of probably the whole thing, because if you don't do it, you wreck the whole turbocharger. So it don't matter how good you build it. Hammer, punch. Gonna go around that whole thing and drive that snap ring in, because it will move in about another 3/16 of an inch. If you don't, the cover will shift enough to whack the wheel, or blows the cover off. This thing weighs a ton. Whee. There you go. hx35. So I know there's a lot of stuff about there about clones having problems. Clones have problems when you don't go through them. Clones have problems when you don't go through them, because a lot of times there are problems with the bearing sets, problems with the thrust collars, problems with the piston ring end gaps. As far as the housings go, housings are just as tough. I have not had one come through. So housings are just as tough. I have not had a compressor wheel failure burst and destroy one of these covers. well, I should say come out of the cover. I have had them destroy the covers, but I have not had compressible parts ever come out of a compressor cover. It is something I'm certainly aware of on the dyno. I do not stand anywhere near the turbocharger um, because that is always a possibility that it could happen. Now, in the 7 years of doing this, one time on an hx35, we had with a billet wheel, had a very small piece of wheel come through the cover, but didn't exit the vehicle. So that is the one instance where I've seen it happen, and that was a OEM cover. If anybody was curious, that was not an aftermarket cover, that was an OEM cover. On the aftermarket covers, never had problems. Turbine housings, never had problems. Um, as far as stock turbos go, have not had one stock turbo failure to date. Knock on wood, knock on metal. So, all the learning and everything that's come from killing turbochargers has all come from the performance side of it. We're using, the same frame size turbochargers to do extraordinary things, and they do it extraordinarily well. But the tolerance for things being correct is substantially more important. It's important on this guy. This is built no different than how I do any of the other ones. But it does get a lot more important when you're taking the same bearing sizes and thrust sizes and journal sizes and spinning them at speeds that far exceed their original applications, paired with the loading that's occurring being beyond their specifications. Things happen, and you either learn from them or you don't. But I do try to do my due diligence to learn from each and every one that does have a problem. Stock turbos hold up. They're used within their stock means. This guy here, as it sits without any modifications done to it, this is a 350 horsepower turbocharger. Typically what we're seeing with turbine work, they're picking up anywhere from about 20 to 60 wheel. Obviously don't expect to say pick up 60 wheel, 80 wheel each time. This is probably going to pick up closer to that 20 to 30 mark. So 370, 400 on my dyno. I'm going to make one of these for myself to try out personally. Go revisit that stock turbo testing and see if we can't break 400 on my dyno with one. That'd be pretty cool. On stock injectors, it'd be even cooler. So I think that's all there is to it. Said don't all the new stuff out there that's hx35 that people are selling, they're all clones. Wholeset doesn't give a crap about the old stuff. They're not making the old stuff. You can't call them up on the phone and order parts from them. They could care less. You either buy a complete turbocharger for a unit that they stock, so you'd be looking at getting complete turbochargers for maybe the 03 to 07s, but for the most part it's 07.5 to current. And if you work in a shop and you see the price tag of those new units, you know what I'm talking about. So this is how we can keep these old trucks running and make them better. H1Cs do have thrust bearing problems out of the box. Their thrust system is smaller and designed for lower power applications. So typically when you turn them up, those problems show up. So your 89 to 95 trucks, I do try to get people out of those H1Cs as soon as I can. They do have upgrades for them. They seem to do well as long as you are very diligent to run a pressure additive and not surge those turbochargers. They seem to do pretty good. But besides that, if you don't want to pay attention to the turbocharger, you just want to run it, going to a 3540 frame is quite the upgrade. I do plan on having these on the website here soon, both the 100% OEM versions and the performance turbine versions in this setup. So these are geared towards people with stock trucks that have had a turbo failure and are in a hurry. Plan is to have these on hand. And also geared towards maybe trucks that just have governor springs or just have a small set of injectors on stock governor springs. You really like how the stock truck drives, or you really like how you're slightly better than stock truck drives. That maybe need a little bit more EGT control, so the turbine mod, or I said turbo failure, needs one quick. These should be on hand. can think of anything else. I had a 96 for a little while. Turned up pump all the way. Stock turbocharger. That truck did 284 tire, I believe. Another 94 truck turned up all the way, did 267. Both these trucks were stock injectors. One was a 160 pump, the other one was a 180 pump. So it kind of gives you an idea of where you're sitting power-wise on that, on that truck. With if you're on stock injectors with the pump turned up, and you're just looking for something that needs a little bit better EGT control, or you need to squeak out a few more horsepowers upstairs, that'll do that. Or if you're, if you're below that, or you like how it drives at that power level and you just need a replacement turbocharger, these will do the trick. Wastegate is mounted to the turbine housing, how it should be. I can't stand the 99, I want to say it's 99 to 02 hx35s that have the wastegate mounted to the compressor cover. What a pain. If you ever do want to do compounds with a stock turbocharger, that thing's a nightmare. You got to spring gate it and all kinds of other stuff. This guy with nothing over here is fantastic. If you get like a Banks housing wastegate mounted back on the turbine housing, that's how they should be. That's the only ones I'm going to order in, unless you need to pass emissions visually. But still, these usually do okay. They usually pass because the Banks stuff passes. So this stuff will pass. But if they are being that picky, certainly do one with a front mount gate on the cover. But I like this style far better. It fits from first gens all the way to 02, no problems. Add turbo kits. Add turbo kits work great with them because the wastegate stays affixed to the housing, so no matter how the housing's oriented, the wastegate works just how it did before. I think that's everything. If you got any questions on this, always feel free to ask. You can go ahead and spec out every single part. You can measure the bearing ID/OD, thrust thickness, all those parts. But it's really only helpful if you're doing a large batch of units. If you're doing your own, all more for it, go measure it out. Certainly done plenty of them that way, especially when we're questioning whether we have an issue with some component. But if it's your own part, you're just going to be putting it together, check up and down, make sure there's nothing. Side to side should be it's 0.08 to 0.0. I think it's 0.008 to 0.022, 0.024, somewhere in there. Tolerance is quite high, side to side. Basically, cover and wheel don't touch. Do that, you're good to rock and roll. So hopefully this helps you out. And if you want to have me do a turbocharger for you, go through your own turbocharger, do some slight modifications to it, or you need parts, probably you'll start having parts on hand for these, let me know. Thank you. Have a good day.